We're starting the second part of this painting, the three brothers, and in this section we'll use a lot of the dry into wet technique. If you noticed briefly there, I was putting clean water onto the page where the reflections will go. And now the surface is very wet, and I'm dropping a few greens made from neutral tint, cobalt blue, and cad yellow into the water. You can tell that those reflections, they're running down, they're traveling downhill, but rather slowly. I could flatten out my board to control that a little more, but I'm going to go ahead and work with it at this slight tilt. I've gone in now with some strong darks made up of the same colors but using more thicker paint and letting them drip down as well, trying to emulate the rhythm that we find in the pine forest, focusing on the few tall trees and then kind of blending the shorter trees together. What I'm doing now, it appears that we're adding a little darker tone to the reflection of the three brothers. It's a diluted wash. It's going on a little strong, but as it dries, you'll see that it starts to fade out. That was made up of cobalt blue and a little cad red. Into the wet area, I'm adding stronger darks now to get more of a feeling of shadows and the reflections of shadows. So this is using even stronger paint and smaller brushes at this point because I want to really control the paint. Even though it's wet, I want to have some say in where the darks appear and how they affect the feeling of depth in the reflections and the feeling of depth in the forest above. Now I'm going to be adding some stronger touches to the shoreline. The shoreline, we can define that with a broken line. It usually looks best in a solid shadow, and it helps to give a point of reference for the reflections. What I'm adding now is that right tree. We had the branches in place, and I'm adding little bits of foliage via dry brush. Dry brush creates a little bit of texture, but it doesn't cover the whole surface. You get broken areas so that it looks like very fine foliage. Into this section, I'm adding a bit of green onto a area that was a little raw before. I want to tone it down, have it blend in with the surroundings a little more, and I'll continue to smooth things or polish things either with a brush or, in this case, as you see, with my finger, carrying the pigment straight down and trying to blend it into the reflection below. I feel this section got a little flat of the tall pine trees, so I want to add a few darks to that before moving on. This dark is made up of neutral tint and a little bit of cad yellow, and you can see I'm going into the deeper areas, the more shadowed areas behind the trunks of the trees, and adding a few strokes of darker color. So the term for this is negative painting, where we're going back in and pushing in on the painting with darker elements. We're painting between elements, and that's why it's called negative painting. Here you can see the reason for that. It just creates more depth in the forest. Here's the finished piece. Because I've shortened the reflections, we have an even greater awareness of the three brothers as a beautiful kind of arcing shape that's almost like a frozen tidal wave that's moving towards the right. It's balanced by the pine forest, that vertical of the pine forest. It's also countered by the shape on the right-hand side of that small dry bush, which pushes back towards the right. And throughout the painting, we've used the dry into wet technique quite a bit to create reflections and shadows within the forest.